буду говорить по-английски, потому что я пригласила своих студентов из первого курса, и еще они плохо понимают по-русски, и мне всегда кажется, что и я плохо говорю по-русски, поэтому давайте по-английски. И наш курс называется «География изгнания от Пушкина до Бродского» в этом году, и поэтому мне кажется, что эта конференция очень интересна для них. Let's start with this photo, a three-quarter view portrait of Irina Yurovna Guadanini. Her face sunk in her fur collar, with lowered eyes, not looking at us. This is Irina Yurovna Guadanini in the first page of Pisma, a collection of 36 poems and one short story published in Petersburg in 2012, but based on an earlier German edition of 1962. And this is a quite different portrait when compared to the one published by Boyd in his Nabokov's biography. A black and white photograph of a fascinating young lady with an intriguing gaze and a faint smile put on the bottom of a page. So graphically separated from the following one, a page celebrating instead the triumph of familiar happiness. The extramarital affair between Vladimir Nabokov and Irina Guadanini that lasted from 1936 to 1937 is in this way obliterated from memory. You turn the page as you forget dates and places that are indeed missing from the caption under Guadanini's photograph. Proofs, photos, documents, evidences of reality that are essential to reconstruct the tangibility of Guadanini's life. A life that has always been described in relation to her affair with Nabokov, also in the latest Russian publication. And in an essay from the 1970s, I have found another snapshot, a group portrait in which Irina and Vladimir are together, yet separated, far away. Everyone is looking in a different direction. And the same Irina seems to be somewhere else, detached from that Parisian dinner table. And finally, another photo. An excellent portrait of Irina in Paris in 1936, inserted in Olga Matich's autobiography, and found by her in her family archive. The Russian literary scholar Olga Matich is Irina Guadanini's first cousin, because Yuri Guadanini, Irina's father, was the brother of Olga's grandmother. Interestingly enough, the scarce descriptions of Irina often use words linked to the world of dreams and imagination, Nabokov's favorite world. Viera, for example, tried to convince her husband that Irina was just an hallucination. And the same Vladimir Nabokov noticed that he often wondered about Irina's reality. He once wrote, "I think she has never existed." If we move from the lexicon of dreams to the lexicon of exile, we can identify one word with a peculiar meaning for Guadanini's work and life, and that is triangulation. As Greta Slobin has shown, the first wave of émigré literature was defined by a triangular status. because the writers in exile fluctuated between the lost homeland and pre-revolutionary literary tradition, the Soviet Union, and the European host countries, especially France. So this painful movement of approaching and estrangement has a straightforward embodiment in the love triangle between Irina, Vladimir, and Vera, of course, but I think it is a more complex phenomenon because triangulation can also be understood as a metaphor for space, because in cartography, the triangulation is a way of mapping the geographical space, of understanding your position in the world. And literature is often crossed by emotional triangulation. So in other words, there is always one term, the self, that is less known and then can be defined from two other base unknown points. So in this respect, Irina Guadanini could have tried to define her location as a female writer on the metaphorical map of the Russian Paris, negotiating between the roles of wife and lover, and imitating Vladimir's process of writing, so one pole, without forgetting the other pole, the pre-revolutionary literary tradition. The short story Tunnel has often been considered Guadanini's literary, not exceptional response to Nabokov's Vesna Fialtia. Both works being read as transpositions of their love story. But today I won't consider these two works together, and I will focus my attention only on Irina's work, because I think this short story, even if starting from Nabokov's themes and atmospheres, presents original and self-conscious considerations. So first of all, the geographical space of the story. The main location is the Italian Riviera, but the author provides a wider map, sketched from memory, which includes the two capital cities of London and Paris, where the love meetings between the two main characters had place. And every urban street, every square, every bench is a fragment of the emotional landscape, and the cartographical dimension reveals something of the autobiographical. So the movement from London to Paris and finally to the small sea village in the north of Italy imitates the ending of the story, the tragic fall of the female character from a cliff. And special attention is paid by the narrator to the description of walking through the streets of the village. He gives directions. He writes a sort of touristic guide for the final suicide that is closely linked to the emotional landscape. And it's interesting that the Russian space is absent. Russianness is evoked only through the references to the Russian language. The physical appearance of the female character undergoes a process of triangulation because she is defined in comparison with two pictorial works, the Venus by Velázquez and Simonetta Vespucci's portrait as Venus by Botticelli. And this first painting is observed by the fictional couple at the National Gallery in London, and is described by the male voice as not authentic. They both agree on the fact that Venus' face does not belong to Venus' body. So we are looking at a sort of ekphrasis of the displacement of the self, of fragmentation, of impossibility of knowing the reality. And the concept of inauthenticity returns also in the treatment of Simonetta Vespucci's portrait, because the female voice of the story uses Botticelli's portrait to explain the fracture between the true appearance and the lover's view on that person. So love reshapes reality. Love is an imaginative activity. And from a narratological point of view, the short story seems to rework Nabokov's interplay with narrative voices. But it adds a personal element, that is the engendering of the different narrative voices. So the short story is signed with a male pseudonym, Aliotrus, that sounds like a bike, Howard. And the first introductory section of the story has a male first-person narrator. Then the sections from 1 to 12 present a third-person narrator. And finally, with a night move, a Nabokovian night move, the last section comes back to a male first-person narrator. So building a sort of circular construction. So are the first and the last narrators the same person? We can't answer. And in addition, Guadanini's prose seems to play with dreams and imagination, so often ascribed to Irina herself. At the very beginning of the prose, the male narrator declares that the story he is going to write, I'm quoting, does not have a lot in common with reality. I wonder if it has anything in common at all. So maybe are we in front of an unreliable narrator? Or maybe is he just a disguise for the real, yet hidden narrator, the female voice? So carefully describing the core of the story. The theme of disguise appears from the very beginning, because the first narrator isn't normally recognized as Russian because of his surname, a cosmopolitan surname. And this could be true for Guadanini, but not for Nabokov. So reinforcing the idea that the real narrator should be echoing the female voice of the author. However, the complex intertextuality of the short story, in which every section is introduced by a quotation, preserves a high rate of ambiguity. So the two sections with the male first-person narrator are introduced by verses by Sirin Nabokov. And the other quotes draw a different literary landscape. And I think that Guadanini's poetical self triangulates her position from two known points, Sirin's literature and pre-revolutionary Russia. So let's read the quotation. Sirin, Alexandre Bloch, so the canon, the émigré, Dovitnut, Bloch again, the female symbolist Polixiena Solavyova, who wrote under a male pseudonym as Irina, but is also a cross-reference to Nabokov because they both translated into Russian Alice in Wonderland. Then another émigré, Smolensky, the well-traveled Nikolai Gumilyov, the émigré Zinaida Gippius, Smolensky again, another émigré poet, Wieliczkowski, then a French female letter writer, and so both Eleanor and Irina writes and composes letters, in reality and in fiction. Then the Pushkinist Polonsky, and again Bloch, Smolensky, Knut Smolensky, and Sirin. So these quotes, and I'm going to conclude, form an alternative, highly personalized and emotional canon of Russian literature, based on affinity of social and gender roles, and of destiny also. So Irina Guadanini, however, outside her native space and outside the canon of the first wave of emigre literature, because she worked not as a writer, but as a dog trimmer, managed to triangulate her position and her own experience of exile. Maybe she survived the oblivion and the charges of unreality. And maybe her female character survived the fall from the cliff, because the critics never noticed that we actually read «Она выглядела как мертвая, а может только без сознания». So one last night move to exit from an exhausted map and travel towards new landscapes. Thank you. Спасибо.